What is life really like in Cuba? I got to experience this firsthand at the end of April, so 4 or 5 months back, right? Because we're almost in October. I got to travel down there as part of a delegation traveling around May Day with some youth activists, people from different unions, different parts of the U.S., and we got to speak to a lot of different people from Cuba. We went to the University of Havana, heard some lectures there about U.S. Imperialism towards Cuba and how that has not really changed at all. It's had many different faces and forms. We went to and delivered suitcases of medical supplies because one of the issues that the U.S. blockade of Cuba causes is it's very difficult to get things imported, like medical supplies. So one of the doctors at this hospital explained that they weren't able to get cancer treatment for a child due to the blockade, and the U.S. State Department also refused to give this family a visa to travel to the U.S. to get treatment. And again, pretty much everybody that we spoke to contributed the blame for the hardships that do exist in Cuba to the blockade, right? And that's been going on since the revolution, and the Cuban people are very, very strong, very determined, very independent, very proud. They have universal health care there, so anybody's able to receive medical care. They have universal education through college, and they have the forget the exact program, but their medical school there takes people from all over the world. We even heard a Palestinian doctor in the program there talk to our group one night, which was really powerful. They have very high union membership rates, close to 90%. Like somebody commented who had been to Cuba many times, like the pizza joint down the street with 4 or 5 people, they were going to be unionized. And it's very much a democratic state. Like the government represents the will of the people to a huge extent. So for example, if the Congress, if the Cuban Congress or Parliament is proposing some type of legislation that impacts, let's say, the farm workers union, right? People that work in that industry, they have to be consulted on it, and they're able to add or amend things if they so choose and need to. Juxtapose that to here in the United States, who do our elected representatives listen to? The corporate interests, the capitalist class, the owning class. So we see time and time again, vast majority people support things like legalizing marijuana, giving people universal health care, etc. But we don't get those policies because the U.S. government's controlled by the corporate interests, and our elected representatives enact those interests. It's a complete opposite in Cuba. And not to say that there aren't hardships there. There is. I heard a local Cuban guy. Oh, hello, dog. Hey, hey. Got a dog jumping on me. Hey, knock it off. What are you doing? Hey, settle down. This dog's jumping all over. Who's lived in the U.S., and he was saying there is poverty in Cuba, but there's not misery, which is the complete opposite of here in the U.S. We have both. poverty and misery. So very, very different. And just the sense you get, like I was walking around, hey, settle down. This dog's going wild out here. Walking around Havana at night, I felt safe. I felt safer than I would in a city here, like Seattle even, right? And there's just there's a sense of connection and togetherness, that we're all in this together, because that's the type of revolutionary ethos that is supported and encouraged. Again, juxtapose that to here in the United States. It's every person for yourselves. Don't look out for each other. If you're left behind, well, you got to pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, and it's your fault. And we also got to go to this big event. We were around there on May Day, which is a huge, massive holiday in Cuba. People were waking up at like 4 in the morning to get downtown to hear a bunch of different union members speak, and they get to choose who speaks. So the president was attending there, but they didn't even speak, right? It was pretty wild, and there was groups of people from all over the world who were there in solidarity with the Cuban people, calling for an end to this brutal blockade of the country. Very, very powerful. And then we did get to hear the Cuban president speak, Diaz-Canel, at this trade union center later, along with a lot of other really powerful and moving speakers. Just highly, highly recommend traveling to Cuba to seeing what life is really like, and how the blockade causes shortages and just very things that, in the West we might take for granted, like, for example, toilet paper. So we were told to bring our own toilet paper. One of the people working at the hotel asked if we had chocolate to share with their child, because just these everyday things that we take for granted, they don't necessarily are able to have very consistent access to, due to the blockade, the suffocating blockade that the U.S. has implemented against this small island nation, because they actually look out for the working class there and aren't beholden to the U.S. empire and corporate interests. So very, very powerful. Highly recommend traveling there yourself if you're able to, which technically you can't as a tourist. That's why I traveled as part of this group, support for the Cuban people and educational purposes. And they even really trying to suffocate the tourism industry in Cuba, which is really big, particularly people from coming, let's say, like, Europe or Asia or whatever. There's this really nice hotel we went and heard a talk to about how they were being impacted by the blockade. It was actually the hotel that President Obama visited when they were somewhat normalizing relations, even though the blockade was still in place at that time. It's like a 5-star hotel. You could get a room there for like $150 a night. Super, super nice. Like right on the ocean. There was indoor pools, restaurants, humidors. And this hotel in particular was on a list that the U.S. government put them on, that people traveling from the U.S. there, not as tourists, but as the legal ways that you are able to travel to Cuba, you actually can't stay at this really nice 5-star hotel, because again, they're really trying to make the Cuban people hurt as much as possible, to create as much misery as possible, to then the U.S. government's rationale as well. If life gets so bad there, then the Cuban people are gonna, want some type of regime change. But from what I saw, revolutionary spirit of the people in Cuba, of the working class, very, very strong, very powerful, very much dedicated to preserving the gains post-revolution that have been made for that country and for its working class. Again, and just the generosity of the people, both in spirit and in physical deed. They're willing to share what little they had with us, and definitely get there if you're able to. It was amazing. Highly recommend it. Cuba sí, blockeo no. Cuba sí, blockeo no.